as you can see, you've been invited to our tea party. And the reason we're having tea is that Susie is Canadian, so she has some British influences, but she's also a diplomat's wife. And so Susie said to me, I'll only do an afternoon session with you if they serve afternoon tea because she's very proper. And so, I also oftentimes tell Susie, we're like sisters from another mother, and I'm sugar, she's spice, and I'm everything nice.
Oh, Janice.
So, Susie, I know that on the original description for our session, it said something about using diversity for operations.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what that meant. Did you?
No.
Okay, so
So,
I changed the title.
yeah,
I changed
saw
the
that.
slide. Yeah. And then the other thing that I decided to do
Mhm.
was to change our titles to our real titles. So since you are the diplomat, I
Mhm.
changed your title to the change ambassador, and I changed my title to the positive disruptor.
Well, well, as you can see, I don't know if many of you know, but Janice and I tried to get together earlier this year, and that session was called Disrupting the Disrupted. So here we're here to share with you part 2 of that, but I'm super pleased to be able to do it in person this time. And as you can see, Janice has already started to disrupt the session. So, with that, let us begin. So, Janice and I are going to have a conversation today about why D&I is important, share some research that we commissioned this year with Red Thread Research,
Mhm.
and then we're going to talk a little bit about the actions that we can take to support D&I strategies in organizations.
Sounds good.
Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
All right. Well, let us start. I hope you enjoy your tea.
Enjoy your tea. I'm going to spill some tea while we're talking.
Well, Janice, as many of you, we talk often that D&I drives innovation and helps us compete in the marketplace, right?
Yep.
But why hasn't D&I worked in organizations?
Because people have gotten it all wrong. They've been focused on the wrong things. You know, if you think about the history of diversity and then diversity and inclusion and then diversity, inclusion and belonging and equity, it started off really as a compliance gig where companies felt like in order to stay in compliance with federal regulations, they would start these diversity initiatives. But there was no real skin in the game. And then I would say companies transitioned to more of a feel good type of approach to diversity. And that also backfired because the more business savvy executives and managers didn't see the relevance of diversity to people meeting their business objectives. And then we started seeing this mad focus on proving the ROI of diversity. And I think we all um, believe and understand that there is a benefit from an innovation perspective, from a customer perspective, of having strong diversity and inclusion efforts. But in this past 2 years, I think companies have started to realize that diversity is more than compliance, it's more than a feel good, it's more than an ROI. Diversity and inclusion really sit at the heart of a company being able to have impact with its people, impact in a business perspective, and impact in society. And the expectations that both consumers and employees have is that companies have impact across all three. And so the old methodologies did not address that.
Yeah, I love that, Janice. And I think over the course of the last 18 months, where you and I have been able to partner together from both a people strategy standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, we were really able to challenge the old ways of D&I, and I've been really excited to be able to do that with you. I think the big thing is that it's always been viewed as a top-down thing, and I think where we've made success and progress, especially on the degree side, is to make sure that it's bottoms up. Secondly, we have been able to make it a CEO mission, which I think sometimes, a lot of organizations think that you hire a D&I professional or an HR professional to drive this, and it's just not the right approach, as you know.
Yeah.
Also, why doesn't training work? Because everybody wants to deliver, bias training and all of that. I think where we've actually been quite successful is allowing our business resource groups to help educate from an informal standpoint and leverage new capabilities and different modalities to address why D&I is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was the chief diversity officer at MasterCard. I've done 1,000 roles in HR. One was chief diversity officer. And the one thing that was very clear to me is if you want inclusion to be sticky within your culture, it can't just be top down. It most definitely cannot sit in HR. It has to be both bottoms up, grassroots, because that's where the stickiness really comes from your employees, from your people who push for the change. But it also has to have direction and guidance from the top. And the sweetness is in the middle. And it has to have business support. And oftentimes, when companies sit diversity and inclusion in HR, everyone sees it again as a compliance activity, not as something that's really driving impact. And so, how we've approached it here at Degreed is not putting it in HR. In fact, I have refused to have D&I come
And I
over to me.
appreciate you keeping me out of jail as I challenge some of the things that we've done in the past. So it's been an amazing partnership. I think we need to continue to challenge this concept of why D&I is super critical to success in an organization, and challenging that old way of doing things, I think, is really important. As you've labeled me the change ambassador,
Yes,
as you know, I love change, and I think we need to keep pushing from both ends. So thank you for that.
you're welcome.
Well, we have a question. I think we can answer this to our best abilities, but maybe perhaps we can ask our friends while they're sipping their tea why they think D&I is important for their organizations.
Especially today. Why is D&I important today to your organization? If we can have our mic assistants help us, because we'd like for you to answer the question.
The fact is that our organizations are diverse, and when we acknowledge and celebrate that diversity, everyone feels empowered to bring their whole selves to work, and they will do their best work when they can bring them their whole selves. And so you have to support it, you have to acknowledge it, you have to encourage it, you have to talk about it, you have to lead through it, you have to create networks and bring the right candidates in. And it's how you get the best work done, and how people feel like they belong and that they are fulfilled in their work. And therefore, if you want to attract and retain the top talent, this is just imperative. It's not just the right thing to do because we're humans in community together, it's the right thing for the business.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot of talk about VUCA and has been, the uncertainty and the new normal, but I think we are in the new normal. I don't think there's any debate about that. And I think that diversity of ideas is essential to be able to adapt and adjust to the changes and the amount of information that are coming at people every day about just, my daughter's school, right? And just every level of our life. And so without the ability to value each other and amplify each other and be with each other exactly the way they are and the way we're not, I feel like I just think that's it's like it's such a core business imperative. It's no longer even a human imperative, even though that goes without saying for me. It's about how we stay competitive.
One more response.
I feel when we have a diversity of culture, diversity of thought, perspectives, challenge us, and surrounding yourself with people that think the same way and act the same way doesn't make us grow. So having that diversity, challenging us to think of things and having a new perspective is the most healthy thing that we can ever do. So always come in with an open mind, trying to place a place of understanding and empathy, and being authentic is a very, very healthy culture that we can start to uh, begin and embrace in our organizations.
Thank you. You
Thank
know,
you.
the thing that I think is beautiful today is that people are beginning to understand that diversity is not just about what you see. And in fact, the diversity in what you see is just a symptom, right? The true magic of diversity is the diversity of thought, of perspective, diversity of problem solving, and having all that diversity together,
Global.
global diversity, diversity of whether or not you work at home or you work in the office. Having that diversity is a little messy, and that's okay. The challenge is in the inclusion piece of it. How do you have all of this representation and help people feel included, help people feel valued, help people feel like they can contribute? And as you know, part of what we wanted to know is what can companies do, especially from a skills perspective, that would create a more inclusive environment?
100%. And I think we didn't talk about this, Janice, but we underwent 2 pandemics last year, or maybe 3, which included, COVID and the social issues that arose. But what we're feeling right now, which has changed since you and I started this journey 18 months ago, is this concept of great resignation. So let's talk a little bit more about that as we share out why D&I is important.
Yeah, I think what everyone said is critical. D&I is important for a variety of reasons. It's important because it creates a culture where people feel engaged, feel fulfilled, want to belong. It helps to facilitate those stories that we talked about this morning, those intentional stories that cause people to say, this is the right place for me. It's important because it helps a company demonstrate its real value not only to its employees, but to society. It's important because of business. And it's important also because of innovation, right? But for me, as the Chief People Officer at Degreed, when I think about my role and ultimately what my team should be doing, besides creating great employee experiences, it's to really create the conditions for people to do better so that they can be better, so that they can live better. And you can only do that when people are fulfilled, feel valued, and feel included. And so it is about the business, it's about the human being, and it's about the collective. And all of those things are critically important to any company being successful.
I agree with you, Janice. I think the big thing that we continue to talk about is just integrating all aspects of this, both from a people side and a business side. But more importantly, I think our employees expect a lot more from us because of what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in their personal lives, and the things that they care about, not necessarily what we care about, right? And so, I think on this, the social impact and not only the business impact, but the social impact has really
critical.
transformed the way that we should think about D&I over the course of the last 18 months.
I agree.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about this. So Janice,
Yes.
we ventured into what we called the experiment this year, where we were challenging the status quo. We were challenging the way that our leaders and our people think about D&I. And we did something this year that I'm not sure many people have thought about doing. So let's talk a little bit about the red thread research and why we ventured into that little experiment.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that drove us to that experiment. One was I was really getting sick of reading all these articles about diversity and inclusion and focusing on the symptoms, focusing on hiring, focusing on unconscious bias training, and no one focuses on conscious inclusion. Focusing on everything that was symptomatic of the problem, but not the root cause of the problem. And I think it was March. Um, our communications team said HR Business Review wanted an article on diversity and inclusion. And I was really a little upset that day. And in an hour, I
You
wrote,
know.
never. And in an hour, I wrote this article on how to think about diversity and inclusion from the root causes, not the symptoms. And part of that was about ensuring that we were building and developing the skills that contributed to inclusion. Now, at that point, I didn't know what the skills were. I had some assumptions and hypotheses. At the same time, our BRG, and Sarah Petsis is here, who sits on the Out BRG, challenged us to really make sure that what we were doing at Degreed in terms of skills being the currency of work and our own platform was supported by our D&I efforts. And they also had a hypothesis that there were critical skills that drove inclusion. So we sought off to do this research, and Red Thread thought we were a little crazy when we
I
asked
think
them.
so. Yep.
And at one point, we got really discouraged because we weren't getting what we thought we were going to get out of the research. And, we almost gave up. But we persevered, and what we got in terms of the results is really groundbreaking research because no one else had ever done research on the skills that create an inclusive culture. They talk about behaviors, they talk about styles, they talk about personalities. Most of those things you cannot change.
Yep.
But if we talk about skills, those are things that we can develop, we can measure, people can use not only for diversity and inclusion, but for other types of work. It's actionable
100.
and it's impactful.
100%. And can you imagine? And some of that came from the bottoms up, right? The BRGs, like there's so many smart people, and just the fact that we actually had this inclusive thought process in generating this idea, I think has just been amazing for this research.
Yeah.
So before we share out the research, I think it would be good to provide some context to making sure that people understand that this is a point in time. And so we might do this again, right? Where the skills actually might change. And then secondly, there's been a lot of new things that have come into play since this research started, which included the Great Resignation. So I think we need to acknowledge that before we share this out.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Well, let's share what the research told us. Well, Janice, I think the number one thing we should address is expectations in the market. From where you're sitting, especially as a chief people officer, can you give some insight to, what this actually shared?
Yeah, so we know that expectations of employees have changed. The social contract between employee and employer is very different today than it was before COVID. because it's no longer good enough to provide great compensation or even great traditional benefits. You have to provide people with a sense of security and wellness. You have to provide people with an opportunity to grow. People need and expect to feel included, and they expect their company to take a position on their values inside of their organization, but also outside of their organization. The other thing that is newer is that consumers of a particular company expect that brand to really live its values. And they will make buying decisions based on whether or not a brand lives the values that they have on their walls. And so, this expectation around inclusion and diversity and belonging has increased.
Yeah, as you know, we talk to customers and prospects all the time, and that continued to come up multiple times in our conversation. And we didn't see that before as much, right?
No.
So you and I both come from very big organizations, and that was more check the box compliance-esque type of stuff. But it was amazing to see that over the course of the last year. I think the other point that you touched upon, which I forgot,
Yeah.
and it's a big one, which is the whole concept of wellness and expectations. Given that we're now remote, it's not good enough to just be remote anymore or virtual. It's to be amazing and excellent, right?
Hmm.
And how do you think that changed? Because our employees expect way more today than they did probably 2 years ago.
Yeah, they definitely expect more care
Hmm.
around your health, well being, and safety. They definitely expect flexibility in how and when they work, because that's not only about them feeling like they can bring their whole selves to work, it's about them feeling safe as well. And if you think about the great resignation, one of the big triggers of the great resignation are companies who are not inclusive of those employees who want to continue to work from home.
Yeah.
The great resignation is also being driven by people who no longer find it acceptable not to feel included and not to feel like they have career growth. So we know that there is a connection between inclusion, engagement, fulfillment, and retention.
Yep.
And that's something else that we're seeing.
Well, I know we touched upon some of this, but the culture outcomes, especially as it relates to people, we certainly saw it in our culture survey around our commitment to social responsibility and their expectations of, what it's doing for our culture. And I have to say, I think our D&I strategies took us through COVID. Would you not agree?
It absolutely did. When we looked at our engagement survey, where we scored the highest was in our diversity and inclusion efforts in helping people feel more connected to each other, in helping people feel safe, and in giving people the flexibility. So thankfully, we were able to help people feel that sense of connection and belonging and feel that sense of flexibility that did carry them through the stress of the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. How about the business outcomes? This was interesting, right, in the research, because Red Thread did a special index,
Hmm.
and everyone knows that whenever we talk about business outcomes, it's about innovation, competitive edge, and all of that. But what did Red Thread see that was unique?
Yeah, I think what we saw here is with their index, they were able to determine if a company scored really high in terms of creating an inclusive culture. And they definitely saw a correlation between those companies that scored the highest in creating an inclusive culture had the best outcomes from a business perspective across a number of different dimensions beyond innovation.
That's right.
And as you know, I started my career in the business, and so I am always focused on outcomes, business outcomes and people outcomes. So this was really important in validating in the research that um, diversity and inclusion, especially having an inclusive culture, will support really, really good business outcomes.
I think what we should share with our friends sipping tea, are you guys still sipping tea, I hope? Is that we spoke to not only HR professionals and L&D and talent professionals, but also the business as well as the business resource groups. And I think that made this research even more impactful, I would say.
It made it very impactful because a lot of times when companies do HR or learning research, they only talk to people in HR.
Right.
Um, and one of the things we saw in our focus groups is how HR and learning people thought about diversity and inclusion was very different than how the business people thought about it, and how employees in the business resource groups or employee resource groups thought about it. So having them included in the quantitative research as well and seeing some of those differences was critically important.
Yeah, so let's dig a little bit. I'm sure everybody's wondering, so what are the skills you need to drive a diverse organization? Um, Janice, I think what was amazing about this is that we could identify the skills that matter, but we also said, hey, depending on who you are in the organization, whether you're an individual contributor, a manager, or senior leader of the organization, you have certain types of skills. I think the most aha moment that we got out of this is we did expect those skills like empathy and caring, like all those
Active listening.
active listening. But what we saw was these actionable skills, right? And so let's talk about those actionable skills with everyone here today. But there were three that were cutting across all three roles.
Right.
One was, challenging the status quo.
Yep.
The second one was envisioning a future, right, for people. And I believe the third one was communicating nonverbal cues.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. The big surprise was that while passive skills are important, like the ones you mentioned, empathy, active listening, they're not good enough. And if you only focus on the passive skills, you're not going to be able to take your organization where you need to from an inclusion perspective. Now, that was a big surprise, and we really needed to think about why is that.
Mm-hmm.
But inclusion is an action, it requires action. You cannot passively have inclusion and belonging just be a result of people being nice to each other and listening to each other. You actually have to do something.
That's
And so the action skills make a lot of sense. And as you know, I love this word disruption. No change happens without a little disruption. And so these action skills, especially the ones that you see here, kind of support that theory of the importance of positive disruptive action in creating an inclusive culture.
exactly. And I think it's the ability to drive that change that everybody expects, right? And it's driven from a business perspective. I know this is more of deeper dive into some of those skills, and we've always broken out by personal, personal and technical skills. You can see those actionable skills, but is there a skill here that's really surprising to you?
Yeah, the skill that was really surprising to me was data literacy. And we asked Red Thread to really help us understand what did that have to do with creating an inclusive culture. But it really was more about being able to analyze and see trends, right?
Mhm.
See connections. Because if you're going to be inclusive, you have to be able to look at people, look at situations, understand kind of the patterns that are happening so that you know how to respond. And so, what was interesting to me is that some of the same skills that are critically important for digital transformation are critically important for creating an inclusive culture. And so instead of companies having to think about, oh, here are my diversity and inclusion skills, and here are my digital transformation skills, if they look at the skills that are critically important to a variety of things, and they focus on building those skills within their population, they're going to achieve what I call a multifaceted benefit, right? Because they will be creating an inclusive culture, better preparing their employees for the future with their digital skills, and driving business impact.
Well, I think that's the most important part, right? It's the language of the business,
Yep.
right? It makes sense for the business. It's not just an HR development, right? And I think what happens is now, because we're talking the language of the business, we're able to have those conversations about making sure that we democratize opportunities, we democratize development, we democratize ways of thinking within an organization that becomes integrated top down and bottoms up to drive that change that I think everybody wants.
Yes. And it reminds me of David Blake's presentation this morning, where he talked about two skills that people really needed to focus on. One was intentionality. I can't say it. And the other one was about inclusion and how do we create inclusive learning, right? There are a variety of ways to do that, but this is inclusive learning because it's taking skills that can be applied across a variety of different disciplines, types of work, types of people, and including them and helping them to not only perform better, but to be better, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to my be better, do better, live better.
Yep.
It helps them with all three.
I think what was interesting about this is if you look at our D&I strategy for Degreed and some of the activity that was driven by our products organization, it was amazing to see that they were threading the learning that we were kind of informally doing at the organization into everyday lives of what they were doing as their day job. So I think that was transformative and a better way of kind of challenging our traditional ways of doing things. So I love that. Well, Janice, let's do a deep dive of the three buckets: leader, manager, individual. I think we've talked about some of the skills needed for each of the roles, but the leader, top of the house, they need to drive D&I at scale because we can't do it alone as HR professionals or D&I executive or ERGs. What is the expectations of leaders? And you can see some of the business skills that came out of the research.
Yeah, absolutely. In driving diversity and inclusion at scale, a lot of it is about being able to persuade and influence, right? It's really about being able to facilitate change, drive change from the top, set the change agenda so that other people understand the vision and the direction that you want to go in and they can follow. So that was a good message for us. I think it supported what we believed was true, but to see it in the research that the skills that are most important to leaders are skills that help them to drive DEIB efforts at scale was very validating.
It's an easier conversation with the business
Yeah.
who might not believe
Right,
in D&I.
right.
And we know who they are. All right. Well, let's look at the manager, right? the manager sets the conditions, and we know that they're probably one of the most critical people, but they're so busy doing administrative work, coaching, whether it's in the field, day-to-day activities. What do you think about the role of the manager and some of the skills that came out for them?
Yeah, so this was also validating because I believe that managers are the ones who create the conditions either for inclusion or they create the conditions that drive employees away. And if they're creating the conditions for inclusion, then they have to be receptive to new ideas, right? They have to be open and they have to be really involved in monitoring change because the direction is going to be set from the top. They have to support that direction with action and they have to monitor to make sure that that direction, that vision is actually coming to life. And again, they have to be able to navigate social complexities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tricky.
It is. I think there's two. This group was also the one that was in the middle that had two very important critical action skills. It was envisioning that new future
Yeah.
and challenging the status quo. Like, they're a really important group, and we don't concentrate enough there.
No, we don't concentrate enough there. And I think the envisioning a new future is something we don't normally think about as it relates to managers, right? We talk about vision and we know leaders set vision, but being able to think about the future in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
think about the impact of what the future may bring and how you can personally help make the future better. You can personally help drive a company into the future. That was eye opening for us at this level.
Yep, it was. There's also that data literacy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the individual. Let's talk about them.
I love this one because they are the catalyst for change. And as you know, going back to being a disruptor, I love it when our employees push us and they challenge us and they challenge the status quo because without that energy, without that conviction, I don't know if organizations would move as quickly. And I know that what has happened in the past 18 months, some of it, a lot of it was COVID, but on the social justice side, it was employees demanding change and really being that catalyst for change. And if we're going to continue to grow and thrive as companies, we have to encourage our employees to be that catalyst, to be a little disruptive. And that's hard, especially for HR people. HR people really don't like disruption,
Yeah.
and they get a little put off when
Yeah.
groups of employees are asking
Come
for
to me.
things.
Can you talk to HR, please?
Well, what's funny is when they come to you, Susie, I'm the one that says to you, that's their job, is to push for change. So this one, again, it was very validating to me.
For me, this group is super critical because you talk about courage and empowerment and all that. I think what I learned, because we're a learning company, we're always learning, is it was not just this side; it was also the other side, and trying to help to balance the perspectives of everybody.
Yeah.
Right? It was being challenged on all angles.
Yep.
Right? And so I think that group makes us better leaders and managers overall.
They do. They make us a better company.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. Well, Janice,
Yes, Susie.
we should talk to them about taking action because this could be all lip service, but we know it's not lip service.
Mm-hmm.
We've made some changes in the organization personally, and we know that if we use things like skills as the currency of work, it can take us to the next level, right?
Yeah.
So let's share a little bit about, skills as the equalizer.
Skills, I believe, are the great equalizer. Um, they're the equalizer that provides access to education, access to economic markets. They're the equalizer that help you to think about the potential of employees, not based on the traditional boxes, the 9 box that we put people in, but based on what they've demonstrated in terms of the knowledge they have, the skills that they have used, how quickly they can grow and develop those skills and apply them in different places. And when you use skills as the basis not only of development, but talent assessment and potential, you're able to go up that skill and impact curve so that you are driving more value, more efficiency, for your company. And I think this is what that chart shows. I like to talk about this particular skills maturity curve, but I'm not going to do it today because we're
No.
talking about something else. But yeah, it all comes together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, Janice, I know we talked a little bit about the root cause and not the symptom. Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just really happy that the research validated, the point that I made here. These are the 6 points that I put into the Harvard Business Review article. And as I said at the time, this was a hypothesis. It had not been proven. I would have been really embarrassed if it did not prove out with the research. But here are the 6 things that I believe that companies can do to really be more action oriented in driving diversity and inclusion in their company, to make it sticky and much more impactful, to go beyond these symptoms of just bringing in diverse people and then having them exit,
Mm-hmm.
and this continuous cycle of trying to find talent to lose talent. If you address the root causes, then I think that you change the culture, you change the stories, you change the sense of fulfillment, which makes inclusion really a part of the culture that's woven in, that's sticky, that never leaves a company. And it's bigger than a particular person or a particular leader.
Yeah. You know what I loved? One was that I was able to cite you on this one. Two, I think this helps to have the conversation with the business, right?
Yeah,
And I think it helps HR become strategic partners of the business because it's in the language, again, of the business versus it just becoming an HR action that someone needs to take.
agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we talked a little bit about this, and there are roles in every single organization. Structures are different. Some are embedded as diversity inclusion officers and people teams. Some in business. But at the end of the day, I think what needs to happen, Janice, is that all these players, D&I executives, HR executives, leaders, individuals, managers, they all need to have skin in the game to deliver this, right?
Yeah,
Right. And so we need to make sure that everybody's leading by example. It doesn't matter if you're at the top of the house or, driving individual contribution into the organization. Everybody has a role to make sure that they can drive change in their organization.
yeah. And I think what's great about the research is it not only tells you the skills that the individual, the manager, and the leader need to have and focus on, it tells you what their role is.
That's right.
One is to set the agenda to drive at scale. One is to create the conditions for change and the conditions for inclusion. And the other one is to be the catalyst, right? The little bit of the disruptor. I think HR professionals and diversity and inclusion professionals understand their role, but now they can speak very intelligently with facts about the roles of the other individuals in an organization.
Yeah. I agree with you, Janice. Thanks for that. Well, I think people are drinking tea, but it's also time to get some information from our friends here.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, what actions can you take based on some of the findings from our research and thinking?
I think we should ask two questions. What actions do you think you can take or will take now that we've unveiled some of the research? And the second is, was there anything in this research that was a surprise to you? We talked about the surprises to us, one around passive skills not being enough, the second around kind of the different roles that individuals needed to play to create an inclusive culture. The third was that a lot of the skills were skills that were also important for things like digital transformation. So I would love to hear from the audience, what was a surprise and what action do you think you will now take or can take?
Um, so as far as actions that will be taken, we've already done some things, not on the compliance side of things, because through our own research, we've realized that's not really the direction. You need to alter the mindset. So these skills will definitely help create some pathways that organically will bring about that mindset change. So thank you very much. And yeah, I would say the mental flexibility and the pattern recognition were two that really kind of surprised me.
Anyone else? Bev, I saw your hand. 1 second, Bev. Is it?
I was just going to raise a bigger question that's
Sure.
plaguing me, and I wonder what everybody would say. We keep talking about skills, 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 skills. And I know from many years of doing this that skills alone doth not the marriage make.
Mm-hmm.
You can have all the skills in the world, be applauded for your skills, and you yourself are bored silly using those skills. How do we expand the conversation beyond skills to what interests you? Where's your passion? And what values do you have? Because unless there's a connect between skills, interests, and values, you're not going to find joy in your work. So I don't know where everybody else is on it's more than skills. And what do we do about it?
Yeah, 100% agree that for fulfillment and engagement, it is more than skills, right? If you think about engagement, there are really two sides of engagement. There's some inherent factors that are related to motivation, that are related to a sense of fulfillment and purpose. And then there's another side that is related to what I'll call a little bit more action oriented things that are related to a company being able to provide you with the right comp and benefits and the right career opportunities on the engagement side. However, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the reason that today's session is focused on skills is that there's lots of articles and talk about all the softer sides of diversity and inclusion. They've gotten us absolutely nowhere. They have not delivered the results. The unconscious bias training hasn't gotten us there. All of the other training hasn't gotten us there.
Hiring quotas.
The hiring quotas hasn't gotten us there. So our hypothesis was there has to be something else that companies can do to take action to drive stickiness. And we believe that skills were a part of it. And so that's why we're talking about skills today. But you're absolutely correct. Skills are not the only thing. And some of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about as it relates to style, which sometimes also relates to personality, we as learning professionals and HR professionals have very little control over that. We may think we have control. We have very little control over someone's personality. I always say, and I feel comfortable saying this because I'm married to a psychiatrist, you cannot change someone's personality without some serious good drugs or years of therapy. And since we are not a pharmacist, we don't give drugs to our employees, and we can't provide them with years of therapy, we have to focus on things that we really can help to change. We can help people understand their behavioral preferences and the impact of their behaviors, but we absolutely can help people grow and develop skills. And so that's why we're approaching it from the skills perspective. But thank you for the reminder that skills are not everything.
100%. I think it's also the language of the business. And
Yeah.
you can have the right level of conversation. And I think from an employee perspective, it's something that they can control to drive themselves as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have a comment or a thought? I see a hand there.
Yeah, so in terms of taking action, these are two very tangible things that I'll be doing. One is that I'll be socializing the hell out of this.
Thank you, Sarah,
Thank you, Sarah.
Of course.
as our inspiration.
Yes. I find the results very inspiring as well, as both of you. And the second thing that I'll be doing is, and I've actually already done this because I might have had a sneak peek at some of these results. But I've added some of these skills that are pertinent to my own growth and development as focus skills into grade. So it's kind of that step for myself and what I want to focus on.
Sarah, that was like the perfect setup for us.
Yes, it is.
Do you want to go to the video?
Oh, it looks like there's one more.
Okay.
Susie and Janice, thank you so much for leading this conversation. It's so important to us as learning professionals and HR professionals that we see the tie with inclusion and skills, and that business skills and inclusion skills, they go together in terms of learning. And so having the research to back it up is really fascinating and so helpful to us. When I think about inclusion, I think that some people have advantages such as growing up in a household where they feel secure and safe, and that produces a lot of confidence. And then that confidence allows them to build a life where they are gaining skills all the time and thinking about career advancement. But then others really haven't had the time for that. They haven't thought of themselves in those ways. How do we reach out to those individuals and really make the skills marketplace something that is open to all, where they feel like they can envision themselves growing and learning and gaining these new skills and going into these jobs when maybe they never envisioned that for themselves?
Take that first. Go for it. Go ahead.
No, that's a great question. It's a question that is heavy on my mind, especially as it relates to the most at-risk workers. And those are the workers who are in the fields and on the front lines and the deskless workers. I joined Degree because I believed in the company, not just the product, but the mission. The mission about providing access to education that would create opportunities for people to have economic sustainability and economic growth. And I think we do a great job of doing that with people who already have access to the career marketplace. But there's so much more work that we can do for those at-risk employees who will be most impacted by automation and digital transformation and who have been impacted by COVID. And a lot of those people fall into traditional diverse groups and non-traditional diverse groups. I don't have the answer today, but one of the things that Susie and I will do in 2022 as the second part of this research is to start looking at how we really address those at-risk workers. Because this is a passion, it's a lifelong mission for me and for Susie. So I don't have the answer. Thanks for raising the question. Collectively, I think we will find the answer to that with a little bit of research and factual knowledge.
I was just going to go back to those skills, like envisioning that future and us continuing to push
Yeah,
the envelope and status quo to help us get there, right? And
Yeah.
again, we always said that this was going to be a journey. We don't have all the answers. But
yeah,
let's chip away at it because I
Yep.
think we can get there.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, Janice, we launched Skills Intelligence.
Yes, we did.
And I'm excited because our product team and our global business solutions team, Jen Gropel, created this beautiful video, which is taking action with data. So let's take a look at this quick little
With
video.
the diversity skill data.
That's right.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm an executive director at my organization in charge of diversity and inclusion. My organization has put a great emphasis on diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives to attract and retain more diverse candidates. So how can my team support this initiative? Let's first start with understanding what skills contribute to fostering a strong diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging culture. With the help of Degreed's research and our internal surveys, we found that these were the most common skills across the different levels of our organization which are needed. So we know the skills we should be focusing on, but the question is, are we? How confident are my employees in utilizing these skills today? And how can I support my organization in developing these skills? Let's see if my organization is following any of the 4 individual contributor skills we are focusing on. In the Advanced Analytics tool, I can quickly review one of the pre-built analysis to see the top skills in my organization. If we dive into this chart, I can see that none of the 4 skills are in this top list. I can take the pre-built chart and add a filter to show the 4 skills we want to focus on. And if I have a target goal of 80% of my employees having knowledge of this skill, I can see I have a considerable gap I need to address. Taking this gap into consideration, my team builds a skill plan where we can outline our expectation of skill needs to the organization. We can then showcase a variety of aligned resources to help build their skill capabilities. I'm meeting with the business leaders and I need to outline each group's gaps to ensure alignment with our company's initiatives. I quickly build an analysis in Degreed utilizing some of the filtered charts we built previously. I finished my analysis and I'm going to present directly from Degreed, so I can dive into any of the data graphs should anyone have questions. Having this data readily available allows my team to help the organization understand the gaps we have and the need to address to stay competitive in our space. No matter which group I'm meeting with, I'm able to tailor this presentation using the filter feature to ensure relevancy, which is a huge time saver. I previously had to rely on other departments to get me this information, and many times the data wasn't always accurate and definitely not up to date.
I'm glad our organisation is focusing on diversity and inclusion. I'm going to review my skill coach dashboard to ensure I update my team's focus skill for the next quarter or 2. It looks like Sophie doesn't have our 2 focus skills on her radar, so I'm going to send her a quick note asking her to get started on the plan and specifically the skill reflection request. I think it will be useful for her to take a few minutes to complete a skill review to see what areas she may need to focus on during her upskilling efforts.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I really like the new diversity and inclusion initiative my organization is taking. I see my manager has asked me to focus on authenticity, and it looks like there's a bit of a gap between my skill level and his perception. He recommended I take a skill review, which I have time to do right now, actually. I like how this asks me to reflect on how I utilize this skill of authenticity throughout my day. And the more I answer these questions, the more I see how I really don't leave my organization in most of our authenticity efforts. I definitely have some room to grow. I'm going to start by looking at one of these pathways the team has pulled together on this topic. I'm going to start with this Harvard video about authenticity and transparency.
Well, it's been an amazing couple months since we've started our diversity initiatives. I'm heading into a meeting with the business unit leads, and I'm going to share our updates. I jump back into my analysis presentation and can see all the amazing accomplishments we've achieved to date. I know we set a target to have at least 50% of our organization understanding and embracing the skills we outlined. Not only did we surpass our goals, but with all the ratings we've been capturing, we can understand the breadth of capabilities within our organization and exactly how many people are actively developing these areas as focus skills. Well, the presentation is about to start, and I'm excited to share our results to date. I love how the Degreed Intelligence tool sets are able to give me data insights for any gaps we have as an organization. The coaching resources for our managers to work with their teams to support initiatives, but more importantly, arm them with up-to-the-minute details to work one-on-one with their employees. And lastly, the skill review measurement tool, which helps our employees understand their skill capabilities, as well as provide clear focus areas for growth.
Well, Janice,
Yes.
I'm proud of our products organization with that launch this week. We had a lot of great takeaways. What do you think?
We had a lot of great takeaways. We have a lot of things that we can leave the audience with what they can do. They now know how they can use the Degreed platform to support their diversity and inclusion efforts. But we only really dealt at the surface of the research.
Exactly.
We didn't go into all of the details. And so, for those of you who want to hear more about the research and more details from Red Thread, who can answer more of the science behind the research,
Yes.
and we can tell them where they can find it.
Yeah, so first of all, you will all get a copy of the research in the post-lens pathway, but moreover, you can register for a webinar with our Red Thread partners in the coming weeks, and we'll make that part of the pathway as well.
Yeah. Susie,
Thanks for tea, Janice.
thanks for tea, and
Thanks.
thank you for allowing me to get you into a little trouble with our research.
Always.